I'm from the top of the south, Motueka, and I'm part of a group called the Renewables. We're an environment group, small group. It was set up by a couple of grandmothers, and I came into it on the cusp of the 2011 election. We are very concerned about climate change. That's our rationale for being the Renewables. And we've been studying it for quite a while, looking at different activities around climate change. And TPP came onto our agenda, and we looked at TPP. And we came to the conclusion from just a brief reading that that's a big problem and is not going to help our case in respect to climate change.
What's TPP?
Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So that is the free trade agreement that New Zealand's currently negotiating between itself, Australia, Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, I think there's one other Asian country, Canada, Mexico, USA, Peru, and Chile. And there's just recently an article in The Guardian, just while Peru's in my mind, and that is that the Peruvian government is being lambasted by the US government because it isn't being violent enough and aggressive enough with indigenous protesters who want to hang on to their lands, right, as opposed to allowing large corporations to come in and drill, mine, frack, destroy their land. Okay, that's written just in the last couple of days in The Guardian. Right? The first paragraph is the story about US government, right, saying to Peru, and that came out of Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks releases, that's how we know, the cables, diplomatic cables, the US government saying to that government, right, you need to go harder on these people. Okay, so they're just ordinary people like you and I, right? Sure, they might be living in the jungle as opposed to in cooler Littleton, but, right? But they are living in their place on the land, been there for generations, and they are getting in the way of corporate profits, and that's the response. Okay? Now they and the US are partners in the negotiations for a free trade agreement which is supposedly in New Zealand's interest. Okay, now Murray's already explained the case with Australia in respect to plain packaging of tobacco. Okay, now that's a public health measure that the government's undertaken, supposedly with support of the population, in order to lift the health and welfare of the nation, right? Get kids away from getting hooked into the habit. I know I smoked for 27 years and the last 10 years was traumatic trying to get off them. I've been off them for about 10 years, all right? Now, yay.
You have a full head of hair, Greg, before you...
Yeah. When I was born, or a couple of weeks after I had a full head, no, up until about 28, and then it started falling out. So, public health measures. Transnational corporations don't agree with public health measures, obviously. Now, in New Zealand, we're trying to pass the same legislation, smoke-free. Now, in 2012, John Key stated, we don't have a free trade agreement which would allow a tobacco company to sue us if we put this legislation in place. Earlier this year, he parked our legislation. It went through its first reading and then he parked it. Boom. We're going to wait and see what happens with the Australian case. Now, if we were interested in public health, instead of parking, he could use urgency and push it through quickly and show the world that public health measures are really important and support his colleagues in Australia who are trying to do a public health measure in respect to smoke-free. That would be the public interest thing to do, wouldn't it? So, what happens if it comes to taking on oil companies or car manufacturers or coal producers or companies that are fracking, mining companies, in respect to climate change. TPP and any other free trade agreement is going to stop us being able to undertake public health measures or measures for the public interest, measures that we want to see put in place. We have to find some way of stopping this. Now, Murray's also said that TPP may not fly. But also in the press we've seen in the last couple of weeks, Minister Grosser had a bit of a spell where he was like on the TV and all over the place about TPP, and he's saying, well, even if TPP doesn't fly, well, there's these other ones that we're negotiating in, and they're coming along as well. So there's a larger Asian one, they're going to wrap us up in something, well, that's the agenda, lock us in so that we are part of the globalist, locked in, ruled by transnational corporations and their agendas. This is not in our interest. So, what to do about it? Well, it just so happens that in 2012, interesting year 2012, lots of things went on then, and the world didn't stop. 2012, in December, the Trans-Pacific Partnership 12 nations were in Auckland for a round of negotiations. And Auckland Council couldn't help itself and got involved and put TPP on its council agenda. And arising from a big discussion and an ambush move by some councillors, a fairly substantive policy came out of the Auckland Council which had 12 points which set out the public interest. And there's a piece of paper here, 2 pages, and there's a couple down there on the back there, and that sets out the public interest in TPP as passed by the Auckland Council, and we've made it generic, and so that public interest talks about protecting us in respect to the environment, talks about allowing local governments to continue to procure or make decisions that suit the local area, talks about protecting us in respect to pharmac and medical health measures. It talks about not increasing the length of patents further than what they are, because we don't want to be paying more for our anything associated with intellectual property, which is movies, music, right, as well as pharmaceuticals, as well as medical procedures. Now they're starting to patent an actual medical procedure so that you'd have to pay, like the hospital would have to pay a fee for each time it uses a particular procedure. Right? So, like, the world is for sale and the price is getting higher, and in the meantime we're getting less and less. Alright, so this resolution is very good. Jane Kelsey, Auckland University law professor, who's been key in informing New Zealand and the world about TPP, came and did a public meeting in Nelson early last year, and in that she brought the Auckland resolution. She said, here, this is what Auckland Council's done. And so people at that meeting, activists in Nelson, I was there, then said, all right, we're going to take this to our Nelson Council and see if we can get Nelson Council to pass it. So they did that. Big effort, and pushed it through. Then we're part of the sister council, the Tasman District Council, and the renewables were at the forefront of pushing it through the Tasman District Council, which we did finally succeed. It took quite a few efforts, and we succeeded in March of this year. Late March, we then sat down and we wrote to every council in New Zealand, putting the same position and asking them to consider it, including our Christchurch Council here, but every council. And that's what I was saying, I've been talking to different councils, and part of the reason I followed Murray and Jeremy and the Kafka lecture tour is so I could talk to people at each of the places about this and about what we can do. Right, so I've been following the tour since since Tarkika, and then went up to the North Island for the Waiheke meeting and the other 20 odd up there, talking to different groups, meeting them, and met some brilliant people, have their contacts and etc. and are sharing with them about this. We've got moves, like one instance that's come out of all of this is however you say it, Hunganui council up there. We had like 40 people in the council chamber, a few people addressing the council. This is Thursday, week ago, and not last Thursday, the Thursday before. 4 councillors who didn't want it to be on the agenda or to deal with it walked out, so that the council didn't have a quorum to pass the decision. So like it's real, like there's all sorts of funny games going on. But we are getting traction. So Invercargill Council, City Council's now put it on its agenda. Dunedin Council's got it on its agenda. Christchurch has got it on its, and maybe a couple of the northern councils. There's a lot of things going on over in Hawke's Bay, and they're distracted by a few other proposals, dams and mines and things like that. So, but we'll back up and go over there and chase it up there. The places that we haven't really hit are Taranaki and the west coast of the South Island as yet, but you can only be in one place at a time. So all I've come to do is to share with you the fact that we have this public policy position about TPP, but any free trade agreement is about protecting our interests. We're taking it to Christchurch Council. We would love you to be involved. This petition is directed at the Christchurch Council, and it's saying, please pass this resolution, adopt it as your policy, and pass it on to central government and tell them this is what we want. And so I'm hoping that you guys will sign that you guys will get involved, and if you've got any questions about all of that, I'll attempt to answer them, and thank you very much.